And the challenging thing is it takes a lot of indirectness to manage those relationships. You got to read body language. You got to read what's not there.
What is the Canadian experience?
The Canadian experience, like workplace experience, is knowing
Welcome to the Canadian Dream Podcast, where you find a lot of inspiring information for you who is either coming to Canada or already living in Canada. And regardless of where you are, if you are looking to pursue your dreams, this is a place where you're going to find stories that will not only inspire you, but also give you the tools and the knowledge to move further towards that goal, whatever that is. I have been in Canada for 12 years, and there are a lot of mistakes that I have made, and I wish I had read this book when I just arrived here in Canada. It's called Canadian Workplace Culture, Mastering the Unspoken Rules. The author of this book is Matt Adolphe, and he happens to be our special guest today. Matt, welcome on our podcast.
Thank you, Elton. Very happy to be here. I really do appreciate it. And hello, everyone watching. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We have been talking on LinkedIn for a while, for a few months. Right. You live now in Nanaimo, which is a few hours away from Vancouver.
That's right.
And before we dive deep here into your book, which is not so long, 88 pages, I want to know a little bit more about your background. Who is Matt Adolphe?
All right. Well, I appreciate you asking me that. So I was born in Calgary, and my background is Métis, and my ancestors were deeply involved with the events that happened that brought Manitoba into Confederation. My great-great-great-grandfather was Louis Riel's cousin, and they worked closely, and it was a very impressive time. And so our family's been involved in that for, the whole distance. And so I've been very curious. I grew up very curious about culture and different cultures and what it means to be Métis. And so I've always been inspired by learning the cultures of others, And so when I finished university, I moved to Asia, and I started working over there and learning the different cultures. And I didn't know why I left at the time, And I think when I look back at this book, I had certain struggles myself fitting into the workplace, making relationships work in the workplace, but I didn't really get into any professional work at the time. So I met my wife in Macao. We had kids there, and we moved back to Canada. And I kind of had that reverse culture shock. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you've been away from your own culture for a long time, you move back. And and I came back to Canada. I started because I had to learn how other cultures worked when I lived there. Otherwise, I couldn't succeed. It was very different, not having worked before in Asia, in Korea, Japan. So I had good friends that said, Matt, this is what you have to do. If you want to succeed here, this is how you got to interact with people. This is how you've got to treat people. And so I was very grateful for all the support they gave me. And I never thought about understanding those rules. When you're born into a culture, you learn rules by osmosis as you grow older. You don't really think about it. But I started to look at, the importance of understanding culture. And so when we came back to Canada, I started to see, that Canadian workplace culture that I think that I struggled with a little bit. And then as I was reintegrating into Canada, I was working with a lot of international professionals that were trying to get started, and they were running into the same thing. They were running into these roadblocks and barriers to their own success. So as I worked with them, I started to realize, okay, what is it that we're missing? And so this book kind of came together, and the idea was the audience is multiple audiences, really. It's, for me, a younger me. I wish I could have had that information you said, when you first came to Canada. I wish I would have had that when I was 18. So I think of that, and I also want my kids to learn about that, and I want high school students to learn about it. But also, I have friends that were born and raised in Canada that struggle with their jobs. And this is for them too. They've come to me and they said, Matt, I've worked at this company for 10 years and I'm not moving forward, or I'm getting laid off, or what's happened to me. And so this is for them too. And of course, Newcomer professionals, definitely. But it's really for multiple audiences. Anybody that's interested in learning about things they might have missed that have gotten in the way of their success. And so that's been my focus now for the last 10 years, is working with individuals, working with leaders, training leaders. I wrote another book, Would You Hire You? Which is, because people would read this book and they say, thanks, Matt. Now I get the rules. Things are going well. I want to get promoted. I want to move into management. What do I need to know? So that was Would You Hire You was the next book. Things that companies are looking for in leaders they want to promote.
Right.
And
how was the process for you to write this book? Were you working at a university?
Yeah,
or
it was. I was working at SAIT, and here's what happened. So when I came back to Canada, it wasn't easy. My wife and I had decided we had 2 kids and we were going to move back here. And I thought it's going to be a piece of cake. I was born here. I said, I got all this international experience on my resume. I'm sure it's going to bring me something. And it was nothing. And it almost looked like a void on my resume, all that international work I did. And I was going for interviews and it was one failure after another. I just couldn't get reestablished or even established at all. So I started taking jobs in restaurants, working like that. And then eventually somebody took a chance, and offered me a job teaching some English classes, ESL classes at SAIT Polytechnic in Calgary. And I was working with, and all of the students were these international engineers that were just taking their English to upgrade and then having to get ready to get jobs in the oil and gas. And so I was working with them, and they were having the same struggles I was having when I was going for interviews. So I was tasked with creating workshops to try to help them. And this is where all the information started to come from, these workshops. And I realized, I got to get it out there. At some point, I just got to get into a book so it can reach more people. And that's kind of how it happened.
And this book is from
2013. And 13. December it was published.
Right. I read this book. Well, it took me an hour and a half to read and make notes, which I love. It's very short.
Well, yeah, that's what it was designed to be. It was designed to be a quick read. I wanted people to get the information they needed and move on.
And not have the excuse to not read it.
Well, yeah, and it's just people need information, It's difficult. When you're born in a culture, you get the opportunity to be raised in the culture. But when you're an adult, you're a professional, you're in a new culture, you just, okay, what do I need to know?
Yeah, you need a crash course.
Yeah, you need a bit of a crash course. And that was it.
And another thing too is that I really appreciate something like this because you might have come across this issue many, many times. For any newcomer, Canadians usually don't give feedback. Yeah, if they do, it's in such an indirect way,
right,
that many, many newcomers do not even realize that they are receiving feedback, constructive feedback,
right,
and that change is being requested, is being required. They just think, they said great things, and through a comment that I might take note on or not. Right. But no, all that matters is that comment. All the niceness is just a way to package that. So I think this is where the main value is. It's feedback. Hey, there are actually 10 rules, and here they are. I'm sure there's more than 10.
Those will get you started.
Yeah.
Right.
Where do you think the Canadian culture actually comes from?
Well, it's an interesting question. And when I do talks and I help people understand some of these things, that's ultimately where the conversation comes from. Where does this all come from? Why is it like this? And I think everywhere in the world, every culture is different. And I start a lot of my talks by saying, I don't think there's a perfect culture. I mean, there's always beautiful things about a different place, a different work environment, and there's always some challenges we've got to navigate, right? So Canada's no different. And, in the United States, they have their challenges as well. They're a little bit more direct, okay, than we are up here in Canada. But where did it come from? It's a curious thing, and it almost could be a separate podcast in itself, But essentially, the short history is this. When Canada developed, it had a very authoritarian government that was very you could even go so far as to call it racist, the original Johnny MacDonald government. Okay. And they had a very hard line about how they wanted to do things. And so there was this long history of the nail got hammered down. If you went against the government, the nail just got hammered down. So what happened is the culture developed in such a way where you just kind of did what
you were told to do.
You were kind of told to do. And everybody saw that if you went out of step, you saw what was happening to Indigenous people in residential schools. You saw what was happening to Métis people. You saw what was happening to people that kind of decided to try to step out and try to present another way. Even though immigrants came from all around the world, when they started to get settled, they started to realize, so my mother, she's Scandinavian and her father was Ice Atlantic and her mother's Norwegian. I might have that backwards in the moment here. But when they came over, they were Canadian. No, we don't speak Norwegian. We don't speak Icelandic. We don't carry those traditions. We're Canadian. The sooner you fit in. I have a neighbor who's from Holland, and he came over, and his uncle greeted him at the ferry. This was in the late 70s, early 80s, I imagine. And so my friend, the neighbor, started talking Dutch to his uncle. He says, "No, not here. You speak English. This is it. You leave that behind." And this was a message a lot of earlier immigrants were faced with. And sometimes I meet someone, like I met somebody recently and I said, "Your name, is that an Irish name?" "No, I'm Canadian." And so earlier immigrants, when they came here, they started to see that I guess we got to kind of fit in. And, so Canada has its own culture and there's a long history there. With conflict with Indigenous peoples, perhaps with Europeans, and eventually a culture just started to take root, but just started to become a Canadian way of thinking where you try to fit in and not resist, the status quo. And as a result, people started to dislike conflict. And as a result, people started avoiding conflict and maybe speaking more indirectly. And so this culture kind of started to arise where let's not have conflict. Let's avoid conflict. Let's not say anything negative that could prompt conflict. And so that kind of got built into the workplace culture too.
Mm-hmm.
People that could manage those conversations, people that could do that were more successful. They were seen as more valuable because they were able to build those relationships with those principles in mind. And the challenging thing is it takes a lot of indirectness to manage those relationships. You got to read body language. You got to read what's not there. And if you come from a very direct culture where people say what they think and they're not afraid of conflict because that's part of the conversation. So if I say, "What do you think of that restaurant?" You say, "I think it's terrible." I said, "Why do you think it's terrible?" "Well, why do you like it?" I say, I think the service is good. The service is good. And we can go back and forth and we can have a conflict.
Yeah.
And we can still be friends. That's a direct culture conversation. And so if you were to move to a place where, and there's other indirect cultures in the world.
Oh yeah.
Canada's not the only
Japan,
right?
Absolutely.
And so Canada is one of them, and so it's kind of evolved in that kind of way. And so I'd say it's a complicated history.
Yeah.
It has evolved and it's there. And
like I just said before, it takes a while for newcomers to understand that difference and to pick that up. I moved from Germany.
Okay.
I was living in Berlin, did my master's there, and then I moved back to Canada. I had been here for 9 months before. So I was there in Germany for 3 years and came back. And I wish I knew most of these things 12 years ago, because it took me at least some 5 or 7 years to understand what relationships should be like with coworkers, with clients, with other business owners, and when I should not talk about politics. I used to talk about politics all the time.
Right.
Thinking it's the most normal thing. And now it's one of the topics that I talk about the least.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm not stupid. I know. I see what happened to the truckers. I can't speak my mind. if I want to have a thriving business, it's pretty much that bad for someone who comes from another place like Germany, for example.
Okay.
Or I can't imagine how hard it must be for Russians who are very direct. Having said that, I was talking to my wife today before coming here. I said, I'm so looking forward to talking about these things today. And I actually think that the Canadian workplace is great because having lived in other places, like I lived in Italy, in Germany, in Brazil, where I studied and worked, Canada is amazing. It's way better to have an indirect environment where people are actually friendly or polite than being in an environment where people are really direct.
Well, it's interesting. It's just different, right? It's different. And yeah, everybody has their preferences. Some people like a very direct background. They like a very direct leadership style.
Yeah.
They like to be told, okay, well, am I doing this wrong? Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
Other people like a little bit more indirectness. They don't want to be told they've made a mistake. Maybe they just want to be, maybe a hint is enough.
Yeah.
Right. So I find that what's happening is, so in the Canadian workplace, you've got to find a balance.
Yeah.
So if you're working with very direct people and you yourself are indirect, you got to stretch yourself a little bit to help them. And versus if you're very direct and you're working with indirect people, you've got to try to use a method of communication that won't hurt them, perhaps.
Which brings us to rule number 1. Rule number 1 in your book is care about other people's feelings first.
What it means is read the situation. Oftentimes the strongest communication tool we have is listening, and we listen to people and we're able to understand them better. And so if you can understand people better, different personalities, different communication preferences, you can support them and you can, be more empathetic. And that's, I think, what we need more of in the Canadian workplace, right? We have a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, looking for opportunities. They need that as well. They need to be looked at as an individual that wants to bring their whole selves to work. And how can they do that? And so there has to be kind of flexibility. So think of people's feelings, how do they want to get information? So it's just like, for example, if you work for something that's really direct, it's like, can you get this for me by 4:00? Yes, no. And they like it back and forth. And there's some people, you might come to their office and say, I need this report, but you would never start that way. You would say, hey, how are you doing? How was your weekend? How are you doing? Good. I really like that plant you brought to work. That really makes the office look nice. Is there any chance we could talk about that report that we're working on together? And they're like, yes, oh yes, absolutely, I have it right here. So it's all about how you approach different people. So think about their feelings, and I think if everybody just kind of processed like that, I think we'd have a lot more inclusive workplaces.
Rule number 2 is one of my favorite ones. It is understand indirect communication.
Mm-hmm.
Examples? You just gave me one, but are there any other examples?
Well, there's a lot of examples. Like when I was coming back and I was going for job interviews, for example, and I was kind of struggling to find work initially, and I was going for job interviews, and I had these kind of real fashionable, not these ones, I had these fashionable glasses from when I was in Macao. Everybody wears kind of the latest fashion, latest trends, everything. But you kind of come to Canada and things are toned down a little bit. But I was going to job interviews in very stylish Gucci glasses, black and white frames. And I remember I was in those interviews and I would get comments like, those are nice glasses. And, I would say, well, thank you, because I was out of touch, I guess, with that indirectness for a lot of years being overseas, and indirectly what they're trying to tell me is, it's a little too much for our office place, take a look around. Is anybody wearing glasses? It wouldn't break my career to go to work with glasses like that, but it's an indirect comment that Or when I started teaching, for example, I would wear a suit. I had suits, and when I was in Macao, I wore suit jackets to work. And so when I was in Canada, I was going to work. I was teaching some classes, and I was wearing a jacket. And people would say, "Hey, going for a job interview?" And I say, "No, I'm not going for a job interview. I'm just coming to work." And then I realized, well, was I making people uncomfortable because I was, dressing up a little too much? When I looked around, people were not dressed like that, And so I was thinking, well, maybe that was an indirect way of saying, "Hey, too much, maybe," right? So those are the kind of indirect things. And, people often struggle, like, you'll be doing a chore that your manager asks you to do, and your manager will come in and you say, "Did I do a good job? Is this what you wanted me to do?" And you'll get an answer like, "It's good. Usually when we start here and then work here and then we finish this task, but you've completed it. Good job. Looks good."
Oh, that's not good.
That means it's not good, right? And the challenge is when you're dealing with a manager that's indirect, you've really got to read between the lines.
Yeah.
Because
it's exhausting.
It can be, and that's what a lot of people say, "I can't do that." And I said, no, it's just like learning another language. You're just in a different place. You just got to get used to it. And eventually you'll pick up on all of that. It's like when I tell people, if you ask somebody to be a reference for you, a job reference, you say, "Can you be a reference for me while I apply for jobs?" And if they say something like, "Yeah, I could be a reference," I say to people, say to that person, "Thank you very much," and never ask them again.
Yeah.
Because there's a good chance they're telling you indirectly that they'd be uncomfortable being a reference. So it's about reading between the lines, and it takes a little bit of effort, but anyone can do it.
How would an indirect manager ask the new hire to stay longer or to volunteer for another project that is not in their job description?
They might just ask like that, or they might say something like, "We're so-and-so called in sick and we're a little short-handed."
Do you have any plans for it?
Yeah. Do you think you're able to work an extra shift? And yeah, they may ask like that, or it may be a little more directly if they really need support. Yeah. But the bigger question is, how do you say no if you can't?
Which is in your book.
Yeah,
isn't it?
That's a big part of it as well.
That is, let me see here. Rule number 10, know when to say no. Okay, tell me about it.
Well, the thing there is, so like I was saying, if you have a good manager, just try to support them and they'll appreciate that and they'll help you advance in your career.
You actually say that at the beginning of any job, you should only say yes.
Well, I do caution people against, if there's kind of managers that are a bit take advantage of you, that are a bit abusive, absolutely you say no, you get out of that situation. If you have someone that really does have your best intentions at heart, is your manager, it's always good to try to be as supportive as you can. And, early on, I've had some really good managers and they would ask me things like, "Hey, could you work on a Saturday?" And I appreciate everything that manager did for me. And so sometimes it would be a difficult phone call back home saying, "I know we had this plan, but I'd really like to support this manager and be there to cover that shift. They need my help." And so when I say be cautious of no, no is a strong word in an indirect culture. It can be perceived. And that's the thing. We talk about, I don't know if we're going to get into conflict, how there's a avoidance of conflict, but that's where indirect cultures come from. They don't like conflict. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about conflict, if you're from a direct culture, when I ask somebody from a direct culture, how do you define conflict? It's two people screaming at each other, potentially ending in a physical altercation. But, they don't think of a conversation where we go back and forth and talking about what's our favorite burger place. You like this, I don't like that, and I disagree with you. They'd never consider that a conflict. But in an indirect culture, everything is a conflict, right? And so if we use the word no frequently enough, that's grating to people. because it's potentially you're creating these small conflicts. The other thing is words like but. Yes, I like your idea, but that's a conflict, that creates challenges between colleagues if those kind of words are used too much. And, and I've talked about the weather in the book. And, they say Canadians like to talk about the weather. The weather's a test. It's a test to see, if I ask you, it's a little bit cool today, and you say, not for me, it's hot. That's a conflict. If I'm an indirect person, that's a potential conflict. That means that you're not afraid to disagree with me. And I start to visualize our entire relationship together. Every time we work on a project, I'm going to say this and you're going to say something contrary. I start to visualize it, and it starts to make me a little uncomfortable that I'm going to have those direct conversations. And so sometimes when we just ask somebody, it's kind of cool today, and they say, yes, it is. That's an immediate friendship. That's an immediate connection. But if somebody says, not for me, it's a little hot. It's like that sends a message to an indirect person that potentially.
Interesting. So how does one learn to say no at the workplace?
There's an art to it, So for example, if somebody asks you to take on an extra shift, there's a formula, you always start by giving the reason first. Give the reason before the rejection, because once you say no, nobody listens to the why. So it's always good to start with, can you work an extra shift? If you start something like, my family's coming in from out of town. I've got to meet them at the airport at 7. Unfortunately, I can't work that shift tonight.
But is there anything else I can do? But what if I stay longer tonight? Maybe we don't need.
Yeah, I'll look for some alternatives, right? Mm-hmm. Say, you can say, next time though, reach out for sure. Just tonight, this is last minute, and I had this other plan, but I really do want to support you. And you can turn the but into a reward.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you start with a positive and say, I like your idea, but, and then you go into the negative. But if you start with a negative, say, I'm sorry, I can't help you tonight, but in the future, I can. You elevate it from a negative, right? So yeah, it's how you use how you approach it, and if you can speak in a way like that, where you show empathy for the manager and you're able to, show that you understand their situation, but that's how a good no is. But I haven't always been good at it.
You haven't?
No, I had a manager and that I really appreciated, and I often did projects for this manager, and even though I didn't have time to do it. And interestingly enough, after about 5 years of this, one day this manager said, can you do this project? And I couldn't say no, I couldn't. But this is how it came out. Can you do this project? And I said, yes, I can do that. And this manager said, wow, that's the first time you've said no to me. And I said, and this person knew what that meant, that indirectness. I even said yes with a hesitation and a little bit of, almost apologizing, and said it. And that sent a message that
you were actually
saying no.
Wow. Cultures, especially in the first world, like the richest countries, they are a little bit more complex. I learned that when I moved to Germany. First, at the age of 17 as an exchange student, and then in my late 20s, working. I worked there, I studied there, and I realized, wow, it's way more complex than in Latin America. And I see that there are some extra layers here in Canada. It's so easy to say, hey, can you do this? Yes? No? Done. But no, you learn, okay, let's add 2 layers to that. Boom, boom, boom. It's also a way for us to filter people out, because it takes a lot of, it takes extra skills for you to get promoted, which is the subject of your second book, right?
That's right. And you're right. It's almost like, I've heard it described that you almost have to be like a sharp, unused knife in a way, when it comes to conflict. Like, you've never had conflict. You've never had disagreements with people. You've always managed to have conversations where you put other people first, where you've respected their feelings. And then those are the people that get gradually promoted.
Yeah.
So
there's a quote here. I actually have a screenshot here of your book.
Yeah.
You say, the fact is, to succeed in the workplace here in Canada, you really need to weigh your words carefully, read between the lines, and be mindful of non-verbal cues.
That's right.
Ignoring any of these creates problems for you and others. But that's just the nature of our Canadian culture.
There it is, yeah.
Right? Another subject that I liked here, I put here rules 1, 2, 4. I like rule number 4 too. Let's talk about rule number 4. Don't be perceived as arrogant.
That's a very important one. And, arrogance is a funny thing. And in different cultures, it's defined differently. But arrogance in an indirect culture, I find in the Canadian workplace is the idea of teamwork. In the Canadian workplace, the idea of the team is to fit in. And I tell people, like, if you're starting a job and you're going in and everybody's talking about hockey, okay, and maybe you don't watch hockey, maybe you're not interested in it, but they said, hey, Elton, did you see the game last night? And if you're to say, I don't watch hockey, in that moment, you've probably damaged every relationship around you in that moment. And that is almost perceived as a type of arrogance, because it's like, wow, we're all here trying to fit in. If you're not interested in hockey, maybe you could have at least asked a question and said, no, I didn't see the game. How was it? You could have tried to be a part of the team. You could have tried to integrate a little bit, but instead you decided to stand back and say, all of you like hockey and I don't. And that's fine. And people are allowed to have their opinions, right? But just to be mindful of, that's a form of arrogance, to say that, I don't need to follow these expectations where I need to make people feel good about generally what everybody feels good about. And so sometimes that arrogance can be perceived in not willing to fit in. For example, if everybody wears beige shirts to work and somebody comes in with a red shirt and red tie and red shoes, that's perceived as, whoa, that person is really not afraid to step out and be, to stand apart and not apologize for who they are. And that starts to make people feel, can we trust this person to be part of a team, to fit in, to support us?
So on Halloween, if at your company everybody dresses up, on Halloween you should suck it up and wear something funny.
You should. And then there's the other side where I've had friends that, they, around Halloween or holidays, they dress up and come to work when nobody else does, and that's created some challenges, for them, so it's the ability to kind of see the team and try to be a part of it and try to fit in. And that's why they always go back to this Canadian workplace experience. Do you have Canadian workplace experience? And what they're asking people is, are you aware of all that?
Oh, I love that. So let me ask you the question directly.
Sure.
What is the Canadian experience?
The Canadian experience, like workplace experience, is knowing how to communicate effectively with people in a potentially indirect environment, how to disagree without being disagreeable, understanding that you need to support others and put yourself second, and how to communicate this on a regular basis. And we can learn to do that through volunteering, through any kind of job we have. And so sometimes when they ask you, do you have that Canadian workplace experience? They're wondering, do you have the knowledge that we require to have somebody that kind of knows how to work with a team effectively in that indirect work experience?
So that's why it has nothing to do with with the skills, with the hard skills at the workplace.
No, it isn't. And I've seen a lot of people very capable in their technical fields, but in the end, if they can't manage those relationships, they'll go and they'll not make it. And we see this in Alberta with the oil and gas. It goes like that. Every 8 years, there's a downfall. They lay people off and then they hire people. When there's a boom, they hire everybody. But when the layoffs begin to come and they've got to cut staff, they start looking at, okay, we've got this very technical person, but how have they been with the team? Have they been getting along with everybody? Have they been creating conflicts? What is and so what happens is that's eventually what defines us in our workplace is our ability to balance all of that and be aware of it, that awareness.
I love this. It's such a precious insight for me. I never thought about it this specific way. So that's why it's so important for newcomers to volunteer and to assist their managers, to support their manager as much as they can.
Good managers, right? That not ones that are going to take advantage of you. But you have a good manager, you support them, you do some volunteering, you network, and you take any small job that you can learn things from. And all of that helps increase your knowledge and capacity to, when you get that one job that you're trained for, that you have a background for, that you're ready for. Canadian companies, too, want people to be successful. And so they ask you, do you have knowledge in that? Because we want you to be successful. But at the same time, there's high costs in hiring somebody, training somebody, and then it doesn't work. And so but there is that high expectation. In other places in the world, I was asked for Canadian work experience. When I came back from overseas, or like if you worked in a Canadian company, and I said, I finished university, I moved overseas, I was born here though. It's like, well, have you done any volunteering? And I was being asked that in interviews, and I thought it was an interesting question, and I wasn't quite sure what it is that they were asking for. But I worked in places like Japan, Korea, Macao, and I was never asked, do you have Macao work experience? Do you have Japanese work experience? This was a phenomenon here,
And how was it for you working in Japan and in Korea before Macao?
But it was a bit of a culture shock, because I had never been out of Canada at that point, and but it was learning, and it was one thing I learned was if you wanted to succeed, you had to identify who the best communicators were in those situations. Like if you're working for any organization or any group, you have to identify who's the one that really people like to be around, that really enjoy and respect. And I think whatever culture if you can identify who that individual is, and start to follow that style. And every organization's different. There's always very successful people in every organization. So that's what I tuned into. Just tried to pick up on, okay, what works? What are people looking for in colleagues? And I encourage people to do that too. When they start a job, identify that first person that just seems to know how everything clicks, And
I also like this because lots of people think they're going to work and they are so focused on the tasks. But presentation and communication are essential.
It's everything.
The way people look as well.
Fashion plays an interesting role in work, and so again, we have this culture where people, to be part of a team, you fit in. And so if you're part of a particular team and there's a particular way people dress, or come to work, it's helpful to show, look, I'm part of the team, but if you were to step outside, there was one guy, there was a communication course I was teaching, and this company sent this, one of their safety directors to this course. And I teach open enrollment for a college in Calgary, SAIT, and sometimes we get people sent to these courses that companies send them. That's another indirect way of telling people, hey, there's a communication course you should join. Instead of saying you've got challenges with your communication, or there's a conflict management course that looks like it would be interesting to take. That's how people suggest that you take these courses, in an indirect way. And so I'd often get people from industry coming to these courses saying, Matt, my company's asked me to take this course. What do you think? What am I missing? I said, I don't know. Let's see how the course goes. And, every once in a while you get people through there. And one guy came in and really well dressed, beautiful suit, a nice, what do you call that in the pocket?
T-shirt.
Yeah, the handkerchief.
Okay.
And really strong opinions. A lovely person to listen to. But as we started to get to know each other, and he was like, I don't know, and so I said, well, tell me about yourself. And so I'm working for this small organization. I got hired in, and I said, yeah, so tell me about the environment. Tell me about the CEO. Yeah, the CEO, he's kind of a modest person, drives an old pickup truck. I don't know. I said, what kind of truck do you drive? Oh, I got this big, brand new red Ram truck. He says, I got this promotion. I'm really proud of this. And he says, I dress up, I go to work. And he was describing that he's a very passionate individual, proud of his career progression. But as he described more and more, he was clearly kind of, a little bit out of step with the environment he was working in. But nobody can tell you that.
Yeah.
Nobody can say, hey, you're dressing too sharp.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe you want to tone it down. How do you have that conversation? So I think his boss, the CEO, was probably giving him some hints, because that's how you indirectly try to hope people get it. You're going for a job interview, things like that, but eventually he got suggested to take that course. And I am sure that when that CEO suggested that he take that course in a very indirect way, I'm sure that CEO couldn't sleep that night. That he was probably very, just to have to tell somebody to take a communication course for an indirect person was probably pretty devastating. But he did it. And so we talked a little bit, but that's what happens sometimes.
And that's the thing with conflict. Many times it's painful for the messenger. More so than for the receiver, right? If I have to criticize you, it's more painful for me than for you actually to receive criticism sometimes.
It is. There was somebody I knew, and her job was to help with resumes for professionals that were coming to Canada. And so the task was, one person had this resume that was really in rough shape, but she couldn't say that. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, right? So she said, if you moved a little around here, that might pop out a little bit. This is nice. I don't know. This experience, if you want to include it, you can. Maybe it would be nice on the back page. And I think he thought he was getting good, positive feedback.
Yeah.
He kept it the way it was. The boss came in and kind of said, hey, what are you doing there? And she said, I'm just giving him feedback. He kind of needs something more direct.
Yeah.
I don't think he's getting it. And so she did. She gave him that feedback. And it just, she said, okay, you don't want this job on the front, you want it on the back. This is not working here. And so she did it. But that devastated her.
Wow.
That she had to, go to that extent.
My way of giving feedback, Matt. No. Don't even think about it. Well, but I don't even care why. Just delete it.
But it's interesting, yeah. You don't.
Aiden is with his thumbs up like this. Yeah. That's how you talk.
It's fascinating and it's interesting, but that's the challenge, right? It's where do you find that balance?
Mm-hmm. And also there's, of course, we are generalizing it and we're talking more about, let's call it the worst case scenario, right? But there's many areas, there's many environments where you can be just as direct as you were back home.
Absolutely.
And also you build those relationships, and 6 months later you are talking to your boss like he were your sibling.
That's right.
Right?
And I think when you say there's room for directness, definitely like areas of safety. You don't want to be indirect. You need people to be safe, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. There is opportunities for directness, and there are direct people.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the conversations on the side with everybody else. There's all kinds of people in the workplace. Can you adapt to each one of them? And I talk to supervisors, and they have indirect people that feel offended if they get direct negative feedback. And there's others that are very direct and they want that so they can grow.
And a good leader will know how to.
Well, should be able to balance that. But the thing is, the leaders that get promoted are often ones that master the indirectness.
Right. Rule number 5, be self-perceptive and proactive.
If you're trying to adapt and you're trying to make the most out of your career, one of the mistakes I think people make is, I am who I am. Like me or leave me, this is who I am. And if you don't like me, it's not my problem. It's like you got, if you really want to, build relationships, you got to be that self-perceptive. How am I being perceived? For example, body language is very important. Are you aware how your body language is speaking? For a lot of years, I'm about 6'3.5", and I didn't realize this, but I oftentimes I wasn't aware of the space I was in. And sometimes I would be at a counter and I would lean over and oftentimes I had a very direct supervisor, shockingly direct, that told me once, you got to stand back when you're talking to people. You're leaning in a little too hard. You're making them uncomfortable. I said, what? Really? I had no idea. I was just called a loomer, looming in. So are we aware of everything that we're putting out there? Body language and tone, and are we able to adapt a little bit and be able to correct ourselves if we're overstepping? But we have to be always looking inward and asking people.
Yeah, asking, listening,
right? And always with that frame of mind, I can do better. I can build better relationships. I can support people better. I can build bridges.
What is the most painful experience you had at the workplace? Mostly because of the culture, either in Canada or in Asia.
One of the biggest challenges when I was working in Macao was management's a little bit more top down. And I think I was expecting a little more, input from everybody. I thought they would expect a lot more input. So I think when I was working there, I had to come to that realization that, decision-making is made differently. It's, so when I was in groups or decision-making groups, oftentimes the leaders would have ideas and a lot of times decisions might have been made outside of that meeting that I was in. So just coming to terms with that and understanding that there's a different way of managing and planning and leading, and it's different everywhere you go.
So it was not a brainstorming session.
No, it wasn't a brainstorming session. And later on, as I lived there for about 10 years, I realized that there's a lot of different ways to lead a team. There's a lot of different ways to make decisions, just because it doesn't suit your preference or the way that you might have been used to.
Yeah.
We got to adapt sometimes,
What does your wife, Veronica, do?
She's a piano teacher.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Oh, my wife used to teach piano too.
Amazing.
Oh, does she teach a lot of kids?
Well, she taught kids before. And the other thing my wife is very talented for is editing and copy editing. And she's worked a lot on the books that I've written. She's got a fantastic eye for editing. And so she's done a lot of that. And she does that.
What has she complained along the years about Canadian culture in general?
The fashion. It seems to
especially in British Columbia.
Well, it's a little bit behind, It's like like you can go to the United States, you've got so much more access to so many more brands, ranges of colors, but here it just seems so limited, and I think that that's always been a funny conversation, but that's what happens. You don't want to be, so in Canadian workplaces, oftentimes you don't want to be the first person that brings that newest fashion to work, because that could be perceived as
arrogant.
Exactly. So oftentimes people wait it out. So often fashion at work is kind of a little bit, in the United States, it's quite different. In the United States, they have material wealth is a value. And it's often meant that if you have nice things, that means you work hard and God has blessed you with nice things. And so that's why in the United States, you see people, really going after nice things, making sure they got nice houses, wearing nice things, when they go to work, the latest fashion, because it shows, it's attached to hard work.
Yeah, that's the American dream.
It's the American dream, right? Here it's the opposite. It's like if you show up to work with those things, it's like, so for example, when you look at a CEO in the United States, they may drive beautiful cars, have beautiful suits. People say they work hard, self-made person. Here, if you're driving a nice car and you're wearing a nice suit and you're CEO, people are like, they're paid too.
Oppressor.
But it's a different kind of thing, and and it's fascinating. But that was the one complaint there. It's a bit different.
Yeah. Okay, let me get back to your book here. Another one that I would like to talk about: work hard at the job and at fitting in. We briefly talked about this as well. But so your "and" is all in all caps, so A-N-D, and in fitting in. So put as much emphasis in fitting in as you put in your actual job.
Well, and when I say that, it's fitting in wherever you live, wherever you work, and I think in the book there I used an example where if you walk into somebody's home as a dinner guest, you don't start telling them to hang the pictures differently. You don't tell them that chair would look better over here. You wouldn't tell them, well, the paint on the wall, it'd be better this color. You wouldn't, if you saw everybody took their shoes off, you wouldn't walk in with your shoes. I think there's a natural human approach to wanting to build relationships that requires, I'm in this environment, I'm in another person's environment. I'm going to show respect to this person, this group, this environment. And so that's the fitting in part. When you just walk into a house, start changing the pictures on the wall, you're not taking your shoes off. That's what I mean. We don't want to be that, and so I think people, for Canadian workplace culture especially, people get the impression that it's a very diverse culture here, and it is. And there's a lot of different companies and a lot of different corporate cultures. But there's a core workplace culture. And I say to people, if you're going to work in banks, if you're going to work in the government, if you're going to work in industry, big industry like that, you're going to encounter a lot of what's in this book, a lot of it. And if you're in an industry where that has higher offices, maybe on the front line, there's a lot of diversity, and that diversity, there's not enough of it in the higher ranks. But, it's about, do you know where you are? Do you know what team you're with? And can you adapt to it? Or, because, and I guess I emphasize that because I've met a lot of people in my life that, I emphasize that throughout the book, because I met people I felt for that had difficulty being able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, no, I am who I am.
Yeah.
I have my opinions. Why should I hide them? And it's like, and I am almost begging with them, it's like, you have your opinions and that's great. And people treasure you as a person. In this work environment, you might be with people that don't have that same, are you able to just kind of work with them a little bit? Or does it have to be about you being you all the time? And so that's the encouragement here and that there's a lot of, I talked to a friend of mine years ago that was, and the name just eludes me right now because it just came to me, but I asked him this question because he coached people to change for their work. I said, how do you do it? How do you get people to change their frame of mind, like when they're struggling at their jobs? And he was saying reflective questions, a lot of reflective questions. They need to reflect. And so I built in reflective quizzes throughout the book. Just if I was talking to somebody that was really resistant to having to try to fit in to where they're working, I thought, how can I reach them and just maybe help them see that it doesn't hurt to give a little, and
I agree. And it was a great book. I highly recommend anybody who is listening to this, they should get it. I got it on Amazon. So if you could give one piece of advice, keep it a little bit general, what would you say to anybody who is coming to Canada or who is already in Canada, applying for jobs?
Do you mean interview advice or workplace advice? Like how to...
We can do one of each.
Application interviews, you know the organization you're applying for and try to get a feel for their culture and their expectations. And usually HR spend a great deal of money on those job postings, talking about what they believe, what their work culture is, what they're looking for. And they're basically speaking to the applicants, please reflect that back if you can. You know, and I've had groups, like, for example, I had a group of accountants and I had 2 job postings. One is we need people to process this, process that, process this. And the other one is we're a company, same job, accounting. We're a company that likes to kick our shoes off on Fridays, have a good time, laugh at work. And I looked at this group, I said, where do you want to work? This company or that company? And they said, I want to work with the one that tells me how to do it. I just want to process my work. I want to go home. Some people said, yeah, I wouldn't mind to have a good time at work. I said, pay attention to those job descriptions. They're telling you, you know, and if that's where you want to work, and if that's the culture you want to be a part of, because you're not going to be able to fake that in an interview. You know, if you say, yeah, I want this job, I want to laugh at work, I want to kick off my sandals there on Friday, then you go to that job interview, and if you're very stoic, they're going to know that you're not into that, right? So pay attention to the companies, you know, read their reviews, do some research, you know, network with people in those organizations. So I think people should have a target. 5 years, where do you want to be? And this is the thing that everybody tells you, have a 5-year plan, 10-year plan. That's very important to have these plans. But specifically, I tell people, okay, say you have an engineering background.
Yep.
Pick 5 companies you want to work for, 5, and say in 5 years you want to be there, and take a look at them, break them down. For example, look at Shell, for example, big, beautiful company, lots of offices, lots of opportunities. You want to work there. That's your goal. You want to achieve success in a career there. Start looking at what matters to that organization. Start looking at what they do, and you'll notice that they really spend a lot of time working with Habitat for Humanity. That's the thing that Shell really believes in. So I said, there you go. Why don't you start networking, get to know people in the organization, volunteer at Habitat for Humanity, get to know people that work there. You're going to, and eventually when you get to that job interview and they say, this is what we believe in, do you?
You're the perfect.
Yeah, you're a good fit. And people say, well, does that mean I volunteer and do nice things just for the job? So no, you do it to help the community. But why not be, a little bit more thoughtful about where you want to volunteer your time with what, and try to get to know that culture of that organization. But that's my advice: is it takes homework. People that just show up for an interview, there's a lot more to it.
And for something more practical for the workplace.
Okay, so for the workplace, I always recommend this for anybody, people starting out in their careers, newcomers to Canada, just, be humble when you start your jobs and, show people that, I'm not know-it-all, people hire you for your skill, but they kind of keep you for your personality and your ability to fit in. I just try to encourage people, when you start your job and they're training you, okay, even if something basic on making a pot of coffee, for example, this is how we make the coffee. I know how to make a coffee. Or, you know what, in my last job, we did it much better. Or let me show you how I can do it. Just take a step back and say, okay, sure, show me how to make that. And then they make it and they say, do you have any questions? Oh, that's great. Thank you. I'll do that. Just try to be accommodating and so when you're at the lunch table with your colleagues in the beginning, don't talk so much about yourself, get to know them. You're in their house, get to know them, like, what are their interests? What are their hobbies? And really try to get to know them. So maybe when you go home that night, if you find out they all like football, maybe take a look at the scores, take a look at the teams, do a little homework, and then so you show up and you're able to have these conversations. And I think if people can just, humbly start that work, and then eventually what happens is people start to notice you, and you're quiet, and you do your job, and you're supportive, and and you don't speak about yourself all the time, they start to approach you and they start to respect that. And they're like, so what about you? And then I said, wait for that moment. That's when you know. That's when you know your things are working out for you. But there's some different work environments, different places in the world where they hired you. Everybody wants to know why. What are you bringing? Who are you? And so they want you to show up with big introduction, problem solver. They want to hear your opinions in meetings right away. They want to know who this new person is. But in the traditional Canadian workplace, everybody knows you've got an expertise. What they want to know is, are you humble about it? And there are some organizations. I had a friend of mine, and he read that book, and he said, I work for a company, and the head office is in South America. And he said, they have an office here, and so a lot of the employees are from that country in South America. He goes, that book is useless, because in our organization, we have this. He goes, however, when we had to go out and meet other sales professionals from other companies, we struggled, how to have those conversations. But in that workplace culture, even though it's right in Canada, so it's people need to adapt to that. And it's funny, people say to me, when I wrote these books, this is a funny story. I would go to these speaking engagements, and largely Canadian audience, and I would get up and they would say, okay, this is Matt, introduce yourself. So my name is Matt, I've done this, I've wrote these 2 books. And I started to notice the Canadian audience would do this. I was talking about myself a little too much. You see, the thing is, that's the arrogance, right? The thing is, they know you've got some expertise. They know you've written the books. So just tell us what it is that you want to share. But if you start talking about yourself, it starts to feel like it's all about you. You're bragging, right? And so the interesting thing was, I went down to the States and I was doing a talk, and they had me in there and I just got up on stage and started talking. They were like, whoa, who are you? What have you done? Tell us about it. And it was like it was like a totally different, they're very, very direct. And when you get hired in those kind of work environments, they want to know your expertise up front. And it's very individualistic workplaces, whereas here it's more fitting in and team-based. And so it was funny, and I wasn't used to that. And it's a very interesting thing. So my advice to people is, when you start a job, it's not about you. It's not about you. And don't worry, people respect you. They know your expertise. But you don't have to tell them about it.
And time will come.
Time will come, and they know you have ideas, but they don't need you to tell everybody you got them.
Not right away.
And they want you to respect people. So, for example, I've run into a lot of professionals that ran into a lot of difficulties because they were coming in, they got hired. This is their dream job in Canada, and they wanted to show people what they knew. So engineers would take a look at something. They say, well, what do you think? It's terrible. Who designed this? It's got failures on both ends. All the people around the table designed that. And then maybe have a conversation with saying, well, this, I like the plan. I have a couple of questions about this area. Just some thoughts. And, and just have people gradually share their ideas and say, okay, I understand. That's great. And then people say, well, what if your expertise and you have to challenge something? How do you do it? I said, it depends how long you've been there. I said, there are times where you have to step up and you have to be assertive and you have to be direct. But you got to make sure before that time you've developed those relationships.
It's like building a foundation.
You got to build those, it's like Stephen Covey, the 10 traits of highly successful people. He talked about everybody you work with is an emotional bank account. Make deposits, don't make withdrawals. Because eventually, sometimes you might have to step up and challenge somebody. But if you have enough deposits in there, people can manage that. So I said, make sure you have your deposits, and any workplace is the same.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
And a lot of professionals just struggle with that.
And to me, the main takeaway is that by changing your behavior or by learning these skills, you're actually improving your chances to succeed in different environments.
You are, absolutely. It's a magnificent skill, you know. It's just knowing personalities, knowing how people interact, and, you know, just, you know, being present and understanding the impact of everything. You know, there, for example, so we see a lot of directness in American culture. Do you need some more water?
No, I'm good.
We see a lot more directness, and it was funny. I was giving this talk at the library about indirectness and in the Canadian workplace, and there was this CEO from the United States, and he was in the library watching that. He goes, "Matt, I got to ask you a question. I got a problem." And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "You know, in the States, you know, we work for these companies, and I'd bring in my leading management team, and I could throw a problem on the table. I said, we got to fix this, 30 minutes. And they will fight, they will argue, they'll come up with ideas, and then, you know, at the end of it all, in 30 minutes, I got a solution, and we go out for lunch, and we have a good time. We did it together. That was team building." He said, "So I moved here, and I'm managing a Canadian managers." And he said, I had pulled them all together. I said, "We got an emergency. Here's the problem. Threw it on the table. Let's solve it." Silence. Nobody said anything. And he says, what am I missing? And I said, well, first of all, they're maybe not geared for conflict. And he goes, conflict? I'm not asking for everybody to fight. I said, anything like you described that happens in that American boardroom, that would be considered a conflict. I said, that's one thing. So nobody wants to risk their workplace relationship with anybody around that table because it's dangerous. Once you damage that relationship, it could be over forever. There's no comebacks from it. That's the other thing about an indirect workplace. Sometimes one small conflict can end a relationship. And so everybody's very conscious of that. You don't want to say anything. And he says, well, why doesn't somebody volunteer their ideas? Some of them are experts. I said, do you want somebody in a surprise meeting to put their hand up in front of all their colleagues and say, I have the idea. I have the solution. How will that make them look in front of their colleagues? That'll make them look like they're trying to show off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so that's not good. He said, so what am I supposed to do? And I said, get an agenda out a week before. Let everybody figure out what they think. Let everybody figure out what their ideas are. If somebody has a great idea, maybe they could say, hey, you know, I was thinking about this. I don't know. And then somebody might say, that's a really good idea. Yeah, why don't you bring that up at the meeting? So you don't want to come to a meeting and share an idea you haven't shared out yet with anybody, because then it looks like you're competing and it looks like you're trying to get an edge on your colleagues. So I said, let them share their good ideas. And then when they get to that meeting, they'll say, you know what? Yeah, we've talked about these ideas. We have this. Elton has a good idea. Elton mentioned that this might be an idea, and we thought that was really good. Elton, do you want to share? And then Elton, well, you know, kind of a team conversation, but I was thinking like this. And so that's how you have those meetings. You know, that's the safest way to do it. And it was interesting because I remember as I was writing this book and doing that research on the, you know, direct versus indirect meeting conversation, at that time, I was teaching an English class. So these are engineers moving to Canada. And the textbook they were using was from the United States. And it was fascinating because it was that day I was supposed to teach them about the language in meetings. And the key vocabulary was, I disagree. I think that's a terrible idea. I don't think so. No. And I said, you got to throw this book right in the garbage. If anybody goes into a workplace here and talks like that, they're going to lose their job. You know, it's like when you're in a meeting and you've got a largely indirect group, it's like somebody says this idea and, you know, and if it's an indirect group, they're expecting you to use your body language to show that you don't like the idea, not a direct word. So, for example, they say, I think we should do this. You would shift in your seat and think, that's an interesting idea. You know, and then so that person, they know that I've disagreed with them, but I haven't said it directly and I haven't embarrassed them in front of a group, and they respect that. And then maybe they can change and say, well, what do you think? Well, like I say, I think you had a good idea. Have we thought a little bit more about this? And so people got to kind of work this kind of the linguistic magic. It's fascinating. And I've seen a lot of different people in meetings that, that's where their career has been made or broken, the way they talk in a meeting, and it's, you don't have, if you're with a direct group of people and you don't share a direct opinion, that's regarded as wishy-washy.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you have an opinion? What are we paying you for?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I shared my opinion through my body language. I moved around my seat. Didn't you see that? When you said this was a good idea and I'm in a room full of direct people, I moved around. I thought, that's a good idea. And they're like, well, what's your opinion? Well, I just gave it. But I don't know. It's interesting. So we had to reframe that whole thing, and I disagree with you. And so body language is important, and body language and tone.
Matt, this has been a masterclass in acting. So basically, you need to go to some acting classes to perform well at the Canadian workplace.
Well, it's exhausting, like you said. No,
it sounds really exhausting, but we get used to it, like you said before.
Yeah, like when I first came back to Canada after I'd been away, and I wasn't overly aware of these things. I guess I was not paying attention. I was young, and but when I came back and I realized how important all of this was, the shocking thing for me was when somebody would ask my opinion, and I would kind of look off to the side, and I could feel their eyes assessing every ounce of my body language. And I was like, well, that's curious. I wonder why they're doing that. And it was like, because it's like, Matt, what did you think about this new person we hired? They know that I'm likely going to say, yeah, they're good. Yeah, good person. So it doesn't matter what I say. It's all in the body language and the tone. So people are really, they're watching your body language. And oftentimes it's fascinating. And I sometimes give too much away. That's the other thing. You got to have a good poker face sometimes. And I've not always had that in my life, right? And it's because people are always watching for reactions, and the slightest one, the slightest tone, and people feel and so I always encourage people, you want to give advice? And when I came back to Canada, I noticed how people drank coffees, like gallons of Tim Hortons coffees, like nonstop, almost intravenously, right? And I was like, why are people drinking so much coffee? And then I realized how alert you need to be all the time. You have to be paying attention to body language. What is your body language? You can't afford to be sleepy at work. You'll miss too much, right? And so there I was drinking coffee, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so it's but you get used to it. You get used to it, but it's funny. I've damaged relationships unknowingly, Like I remember one time I started a job, and I was here in Canada, and I was so excited. And I don't know, I was excited. It was my first kind of job, and I got on the elevator, and I was on the elevator with a future colleague, and it was really raining outside. Like it was in Calgary. It was heavy rain. This colleague says to me, Matt, that weather is crazy out there, eh? And I don't know, I was in a good mood, and I wasn't thinking. I said, it's good for the farmers. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, it's good for the farmers. And that is the face of how dare you. It's like the point I had to make when he said that's terrible weather out, what he was expecting for an immediate bond was, it's a lot of rain.
Yeah.
That's the test, right?
Yeah.
But when I said it's good for the farmers, I got that look. Yeah.
Why are you being so disagreeable?
Yeah, why did you have to do that? Why did you feel you had to do that right there when we first met? And I worked with that guy for several years, and it was never there was always something there, And I don't know whether I did that constantly or I was always, but I've done that a few times, and I've talked to people about it. And it takes a lot of time to recoup a relationship after that, to build it back. Yeah. I've made a lot of that book. It took a lot of mistakes. That when you read that book, people think, oh, you wrote that book to help people integrate. That book is the product of a lot of personal mistakes, personal and professional mistakes that I've made, that I've worked through, so.
Now, tell me about your second book, which came after this one.
Yeah, Would You Hire You? So I've been doing a lot of leadership training and, customer service and supervisory skills, communication skills, team building. And I found that in each one of those courses, there were some really things that popped out for people. And, people would ask me, I want to get into management. How do I do that? And so I put together that book. It's, again, 10 steps, 10 pieces. What are people looking for you? So this is one thing about the cultural piece, just basically understand people, try to fit in a little bit, be agreeable, accommodating. The 10 other things are really looking into personality styles. Do you know your personality styles? Do you know how the dynamics of a team, what it looks like, the kind of motivation they need? Do you know what networking really means? Do you know what you need to do with that? Do you know what it means to be a leader and what that takes? And do you know that you have to have these pieces? Do you know what diversity and inclusion is all about? And so that was the second book, is like these pieces they're a little more theoretical, but you got to know them. It's like a crash course in an MBA in essence, right? And so it's like, if you can know this, and again, it was quick to read, fast to read, get the points, and then hopefully you can get that movement forward. The interesting thing that a lot of people ask me, though, is, okay, they get into become supervisors, and then they don't move any forward. I said, how can't I get up there? Why is it so beyond my reach? That's a different kind of skill set entirely.
Yeah, it is.
It is, but so Would You Hire You? It's the second book. And
we're going to put that link in the description as well.
Oh, that's great, yeah.
Tell me, are you happy with your life now?
I'm happy that people have taken a lot from this and from the book, from the talks I've done, from the training. And I just hope that it's brought some success in people's lives, in their careers, and they're happier and they're feeling, because in the end, I did this because I had friends in other countries that supported me and just told me what I needed to know. And I'm just kind of returning the favor. Yeah. Okay, so if you're coming here and you're asking me, what do I need to know? But if you're getting into an indirect culture, you're never going to be told directly what you need to do, right?
No.
So that's why, but yeah, am I happy? Very happy. The kids are growing up. Things are going well. And, and I'm just, I'm always happy to see when people get success at their dreams, move forward, right? And I think Canada's moving into a good space. I believe there is good discussions happening around inclusivity in the workplace, and a lot of organizations are making better steps, and I think the culture needs to change in that sense, to be a little more opening, more psychologically safe for everybody, so I'm confident that things are going well.
That it's happening.
Yeah, that it's happening.
What are you up to next, and where can or should people find you?
The next thing I'm working on right now is, so I've updated my website, and I'm looking more and more at how I can support organizations with the inclusiveness and the diversity aspects. I think that that's going to be a lot of the focus of my work. What can we do to make the workplace more open? I mean, it's one thing to talk about, yes, this is the traditional culture. It's good to be aware of it. It's good to identify it. It's good to be, but on the other side, can we be more open to diversity? Can we create more opportunities for everybody? Can we make the workplace feel where people feel they belong? Because this, for years in Canada, it's always been about fitting in. You got to fit in. Fit in. If you don't fit in, you're going to have challenges. Ultimately, we've got to change that way of thinking. It's got to be about how can we be more open to different diversity of perspectives and allow people to live, life the way they can be their full selves.
And on your website, can businesses and educational institutions hire you as a speaker and as a consultant?
Yeah, sure. A speaker, consultant, can do workshops for them if they like. But yeah, that's going to be my focus in the next.
Great. So the main place for people to find you is your website.
That's right.
Which is?
MattAdolphe.com.
Okay. Which is also in the description for this
lovely
episode. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a few months, I think maybe three months since we first got in touch.
It has been. Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. You asked if I get to Vancouver very often, and I haven't been. I'm quite busy with remote work and things, and I never get quite across. So I said, I'm doing it. We're going to do it before Christmas. And
now I'm going to ask you a question. Aiden and myself are going to be paying attention. And what do you think of this experience?
Well, I have to say you're a wonderful guy, and so are you, Aiden. And I really appreciate what you're doing here. You're trying to help people get established, and you're running a real professional looking outfit here.
It's very professional.
No, it is. And I love the Canadian dream. But I got to ask you, and this is what I've been curious about. Mm-hmm. You've read the book.
Yeah.
What was your impressions when you read it?
I told you. I wish I had read this a decade ago, because I came to Canada 12 years ago, and it is very easy to read. It's quite basic. A lot of it after 12 years, and being as focused in relationships as I am, a lot of it has become common sense, which is great. It just shows that I have learned most of those lessons in the hard way already. So the worst is behind me. So that's a good thing. I highly recommend it. And
I'll tell you what's interesting about that. When I first wrote it, I wrote it very indirectly. It was quite thicker than that. And my publisher, who was from England, said, look, Matt, if your audience is direct people that need to know stuff, don't write the book indirectly. Write it directly. Write it as directly as you can. And that was challenging. That was tough to say a lot of the stuff like being direct with that book. So we went that route. Because I guess the audience are potentially direct people that are looking to understand indirectness. And it was interesting because they got edited that way, and it came out as this way, and you're reading it as a direct person potentially thinking, wow, this was very clear.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine that got that book, and I said, well, what did you think? It just doesn't sound like, because it was too direct. It was too blunt. He was, I'm not, making it so like that, but he was a very indirect person, and just thought the book was too direct.
Yeah. Now I'm curious about the other book, so I will probably order it.
All right, let me know, how you like that.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a pleasure. You wouldn't believe how long we've been talking for.
How long has it been?
An hour and a half.
Wow.
Yeah. I'll put all the links in the description. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. If you are watching this on YouTube, please remember to share this, to like it. And I would love you to write in the comments what you think about all the things we talked about here, and share your experience in the Canadian workplace with us. Thank you so much. Remember to subscribe to the channel as well, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Elton.
Bye-bye.